Okay, let's unpack this. We've got a bunch of sources here. Reviews, author bios, plot summaries,
Hmm.
all focused on a really interesting team-up, a recent book collaboration between, well, names you don't usually see side by side.
That's right. A former U.S. president and one of the biggest authors on the planet.
So today we're doing a deep dive into these materials. We're looking at the book The First Gentleman, co-authored by Bill Clinton and James Patterson.
Yeah, and our mission really is to sift through everything you've given us, these reviews, the summaries, pull out the key details, the interesting insights.
And figure out what these sources actually tell us about this partnership, the story itself, and maybe why it's getting so much attention, according to these materials anyway.
Exactly. What makes it stand out based on what we have here?
Absolutely. And honestly, that pairing is the first thing that just jumps out from these sources, isn't it?
Oh, for sure. You've got Bill Clinton on one side, the bios confirm, President of the United States, 1992 to 2001.
Right. And the materials also talk about his work after the presidency, the Clinton Foundation stuff.
Yeah, they list quite a bit. Global health, opportunities for women and girls, childhood obesity, economic growth, climate change. Pretty broad scope.
And they remind us he's written nonfiction before. My Life is Mentioned and Citizen.
And what's interesting there, kind of reading between the lines of the sources, is the sheer depth of real-world, high-level experience he brings. I mean, this is someone who's operated at the very top, dealing with policy, politics, global issues.
Yeah.
That kind of background, you have to assume, based on what the sources imply, gives a certain authenticity, maybe, to a political story.
Then you flip the coin, and there's James Patterson.
Yes. And the sources don't mince words. One flat out calls him the most popular storyteller of our time.
That's quite a statement.
It really is. And his bio, the reviews, they paint a picture of just incredible output. The Alex Cross series, Women's Murder Club.
Right, those massive thriller series, but also breathtaking true stories, apparently.
And crucially, he's no stranger to collaboration. The sources point that out. It's not just Clinton. They mention Dolly Parton, Michael Crichton.
Wow, okay. Diverse partners.
And they list his awards, too. Edgar Award, Emmys. 10 Emmys, actually. The Literarian Award, National Humanities Medal. So the picture is definitely one of a master craftsman, someone who knows how to tell a story that hooks a massive audience.
And like you said, this specific partnership, Clinton and Patterson, isn't their first rodeo. The sources make sure to mention that.
Right. The President is Missing and The President's Daughter.
Both #1 bestsellers, highlighted specifically, which suggests, they found a winning formula.
It does seem like that blend, the insider political knowledge, maybe, combined with Patterson's pacing and plot skills, it clearly works for readers based on that track record.
The reviews sort of hint at that, too, that fusion being part of the appeal. You get the feeling of real-world stakes, maybe, but with that classic Patterson thriller engine driving it.
Yeah, an expectation is set, based on the sources. Political thriller, but maybe with an unusual layer of authenticity, moving at lightning speed.
Okay, so let's shift to the book itself, The First Gentleman. What do the sources tell us, just factually?
Well, we get a release date from one source, June 2nd, 2025.
Oh, okay, very recent.
And apparently, it hit the ground running. Instant New York Times bestseller. Status is mentioned.
Not a huge surprise, given the authors, I guess.
Fair point. And genre-wise, the reviews kind of circle around a few related terms.
Right.
Political thriller, crime thriller, police procedural, mystery. It seems to hit a few notes. One review sums it up as entertaining escapism with a political edge.
Political edge. That sounds about right for this pairing.
Seems to fit. It suggests, delivering the thrills, but grounding it in something that feels contemporary, at least as the sources describe it.
All right, so let's get into the plot, based strictly on the summaries and reviews provided here. The central idea sounds pretty dramatic.
Yeah, it's quite a hook. So America has a new president, Madeleine Wright. She's powerful. She's running for re-election.
Okay, high stakes already.
But then, smack in the middle of the campaign, her husband, the first gentleman, Cole Wright, is put on trial.
For what?
Murder. Committed 17 years ago.
Wow. Okay. Talk about bad timing.
Exactly. And the victim, the sources specify, was his girlfriend back when he was a pro football player. A cheerleader.
He was a football player.
Yep. Former tight end for the New England Patriots. One source adds that detail. So you have this collision, right? Peak political power now versus this violent secret from his past.
That feels very Patterson-esque. High-profile person sudden catastrophic threat. But how does a 17-year-old cold case just pop up now, especially now.
Well, the summaries explain that. It's apparently thanks to two investigative journalists, Garrett Wilson and Brea Cook.
Okay.
The sources describe them as brilliant or dogged. It sounds like they don't give up easily.
Right.
And the story, as described, is that they were initially looking into the first gentleman for maybe a profile piece, something standard.
And stumbled onto something much bigger.
Exactly. They claim they've unearthed hard evidence about this old murder. And this is key. They're apparently shopping a book about it while all this is happening.
Whoa.
Ah.
So they're driving the story and trying to profit from it based on that description.
That's what the summaries suggest, yeah. Active players in the drama.
And Cole Wright, the first gentleman, what's his position on this?
The sources are clear. He denies everything, vehemently denies any involvement.
So that's the core mystery then. Is he innocent? Is he lying?
Precisely. The whole narrative seems built around finding the truth behind that denial and this decades-old crime.
That's a strong premise, but the sources suggest it gets way more complicated than just a simple trial.
Oh yeah, layer upon layer, it sounds like. The summaries and reviews talk about specific elements that make it complex.
Like what kind of evidence are we talking about?
Well, they mention finding a buried body, which is obviously huge. Evidence discovered near the grave. Camera footage from a store plays a part somehow. And there's this intriguing mention of a rule about dating back in his football days.
A rule?
Yeah, something that could have cost him his career if he broke it. So maybe a motive tied to that past life. It seems designed to build a case, or at least suspicion.
And it all plays out in open court, one source notes. Very public.
Adds to the pressure cooker feel, definitely. And from there, things apparently spiral. One source uses the term muddy.
Muddy how?
More players get involved. The descriptions mention mafiosi.
Okay.
A contract killer, FBI agents, overworked local cops, a law professor who seems to know who Cole's enemies might be, and sleek political operatives.
Wow, so it really expands beyond just the initial crime. Sounds like it pulls in organized crime, federal angles, political gamesmanship.
Exactly. It seems to weave together different thriller elements. Courtroom drama, conspiracy, political intrigue.
And structurally, one review mentioned it unfolds across different time periods, different viewpoints.
Yeah, that seems to be a key part of it. Multiple narrators jumping between past and present, which...
That sounds like classic Patterson.
That's exactly what the sources say. They explicitly mention his signature short chapters.
Ah, the short chapters. Makes it fly by.
Right. They say it makes the story move at lightning speed, helps with character development despite the pace, and just keeps the reader hooked. It's the engine, apparently.
So you put all that together, the trial, the expanding cast of shady characters, the time jumps, the fast pace. What's the overall vibe the reviews give off?
Descriptions like twisty come up.
Okay.
Plenty of inside jobs, political sabotage. Many, many deaths. So it sounds like the body count rises.
Doesn't sound like quiet escapism.
No. And one review liked that it was satisfyingly stuffed with red herrings and called the conspiracy neatly engineered. It sounds like a puzzle box, lots of misdirection, lots of threads to untangle.
Okay, now let's touch on something the sources bring up that feels, well, particularly relevant given who one of the authors is, the political stuff inside the story.
Yes, and this is where we need to be super clear, based only on the source material you provided describing the book.
Right, absolutely.
One source points out that because the premise involves a first woman president whose husband is on trial, readers might be tempted to read between the lines.
Makes sense.
But we are just reporting what these sources claim is depicted within the fictional narrative. We aren't endorsing any political view, not taking sides, not saying this mirrors reality in any specific way beyond what the sources allege is in the book.
Got it. Strictly conveying the info from these sources about the book's plot and its described context.
Exactly. So with that huge caveat, one source does detail a specific political backdrop within the fictional story.
Okay, what does it describe?
It talks about a vast right-wing effort that is, in the story, trying to stymie President Wright's big policy initiative.
And this initiative has a name in the book.
Yeah, it's called the Grand Bargain, according to the source's description of the plot.
And does the source say what's in this fictional grand bargain?
It does. Again, according to this source describing the novel's content, President Wright's plan involves increasing legal immigration by 1 million people a year for 10 years.
Okay.
Raising the corporate tax rate to a firm ironclad 15%, and bringing back something called Al Gore's Reinventing Government Initiative from the 1990s.
Huh, specific details.
Very specific details that this source says are part of the fictional political landscape in the book.
Understood. And that same source, the reviewer, adds a comment about who they think the book is aimed at.
Yes, just tossing in their opinion, they note the primary audience is likely not the May-Gia crowd.
Okay, so that's the reviewer's take, based on their reading of the story's content as described.
Precisely. Their interpretation based on the fictional elements presented, as reported by the source.
So pulling all this together from the sources, the Clinton-Patterson team-up, the first gentleman on trial, the layers of crime and politics, the fast pace, why should you, our listener, care about this deep dive? What's the takeaway?
Well, I think for one, it gives you a fascinating glimpse into a really unique collaboration. You see how, based on these descriptions, someone with Clinton's kind of real-world background might mesh with a master storyteller like Patterson.
Yeah, that blend of potential authenticity and pure thriller mechanics.
Exactly. And it also shows how real-world themes, or maybe echoes of real-world politics, as presented fictionally in the sources, get woven into popular entertainment.
Right. How even something described as entertaining escapism can still engage with complex, timely ideas through its plot and characters, according to these materials.
You see how that political edge the review mentioned takes shape through specific plot points described in the sources, like that fictional grand bargain.
And maybe just as importantly, doing this kind of deep dive shows how looking at different types of sources, bios, summaries, reviews, gives you a much rounder picture.
Absolutely. Each piece adds a different layer. The bio gives context, the summary gives the premise, the reviews give flavor, pacing, critique. You need them all for the full picture described here.
It really does build a comprehensive view. So we've covered the authors, the core mystery first gentleman, old murder, high-stakes trial, and all the twists and turns, the sources promise, the political angles within the story, the signature Patterson style.
Yeah, portraying it as this really packed, fast-moving, politically inflected thriller.
It leaves you wondering, doesn't it? How does that very specific blend of former president's lived experience in the halls of power, plus a novelist known for intricate plotting, how might that uniquely shape the kind of conspiracy or the political scenarios cooked up in a story like this, based on how the sources describe it?
That's a great question, or maybe flipping it. How do fictional thrillers like this one, as depicted in these sources, choose to engage with or reflect real-world political currents or specific policy debates? How do they use those elements within a narrative that's ultimately designed, it seems, for suspense and entertainment?
It's an interesting line between fiction and the reality it draws from or comments on, even indirectly. Definitely something to think about.
For sure. A lot to consider in how these stories are built and what they might tap into.
Well, that brings us to the end of our deep dive into the sources around the first gentleman. Thanks for joining us.